First Person continues the conversation we began in our first look as it pertains to the Sea Level Rise Awareness Week, which is next week. And one of the people connected with that event is Brenna Gogin, and she's an environmental advocate with the Delaware Nature Society. Brenna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start by saying we are just scratching the surface on this topic because there's a lot of it, a lot to discuss. But why do we need an entire week dedicated to sea level rise awareness?
Well, as you just said, I mean, it's a very large issue and it's quite complex. 3 years ago, the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control convened what is known as a Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee. And it took us 3 years to do a two-part goal. One, identify where Delaware is vulnerable, and two, kind of come up with adaptation, retreat, or mitigation options for the state. Unfortunately, in those 3 years, a lot of education and outreach took place, but things change, science changes, and people really need an opportunity to learn what they can do personally.
Well, how vulnerable is Delaware?
Well, as a low-lying state, one of the lowest elevations in the nation, we are quite vulnerable to sea level rise. We certainly missed a bullet with Superstorm Sandy, but we've had nor'easters, we've had unnamed storms. I know the Weather Channel is starting to name storms like Saturn that was a winter storm, but not quite a winter storm, but it brought significant flooding and closed one of our main evacuation routes in Delaware, Route 1, down at the beaches. How would those people get out if we had a storm like Sandy hit our shores?
You know, what are some of the things that you're hoping to get out or that come out of the Awareness Week next week? Well,
so oftentimes issues like sea level rise that are as complex and as big are very difficult for people to wrap their minds around. And that can be scary when you don't quite understand something. What we really want to provide is hope. We want to tell people, you can play a part in this. You have a role. And there are things that you can do at home that are very easily done that could mitigate or combat some of the impacts from both sea level rise and a changing climate. Whether it's planting native trees and providing more habitat for animals that'll be displaced from the shore. Whether it's, capturing rainwater through rain barrels or a rain garden to mitigate local flooding. Working with local organizations. We really would love people to get more involved in their nonprofits and also contact their elected officials. Elected officials need to hear from their constituents that this is something that we need to prepare for. We can't wait until it's literally on our shores. We need to start planning ahead.
So we're not saying, hey, people love living at the beach. They love living near water.
Yeah.
We don't need to start moving people away from the water now, do we?
Well, there are several options that can take place. I know that some of the coastal communities are looking at whether or not they need to change building codes so that for future development, if we are planning for kind of a foot to a foot and a half of sea level rise, what does that mean? Do we need to raise the buildings? I think we do have to look at long-term planning. Realistically, can we keep houses where they are? Will they be safe there? Or do we really have to look at a plan moving forward? How do we get these people moving backwards?
Did you feel like Sandy gave the issue of sea level rise some traction?
I think there was traction there, but I think the fact that most Delawareans were so relieved at the fact that we didn't get hit the way that we were supposed to certainly said, okay, we missed a bullet. Now, how do we start planning? We don't want to be stuck in the same situation that New Jersey found themselves in.
And a final question, what do you say to people, and will this issue be discussed next week, but to people who think this is a bogus issue, that sea level rise is not something that is happening or that we need to worry about it?
Well, there are two things that I would say. One, certainly respect that opinion, but sea level rise is happening. All you have to do is go to Prime Hook to see that the water table has changed. Talk to people like Mr. Webb, who's a farmer off of Milford Neck, and ask him where he used to be able to farm and where he can farm now. There's obviously a different change in the level of the water table. Now, we can argue why, and there's certainly evidence to explain that there is something to be said about humans having some kind of impact on the world. However, I think it's planning for sea level rise is planning for Superstorm Sandy. It's planning for the nor'easter that happened over Mother's Day. It's planning for the Veterans Day storm of 1962. It's everyday occurrences. So preparing for the long term is also preparing for the short term.
All right. Thank you so much, Brenna Gogin with the Delaware Nature Society. And we'll be watching to see what happens